Hi guys, Bran here, and welcome to a different kind of video today. Today I want to do more of an educational video. I haven't done one of these in a while. Usually I focus on just like talking about perk strength, map strength, weird stuff like that. But today I wanted to focus again on something that perhaps helps you get better at the game, helps you improve as a player, because I've been watching a lot of killer streamers lately, and I see one of the biggest mistakes that they make is kind of like over committing to bad setups and not correctly identifying like really strong survivor setups and not being able to see if a tile or maybe a combination of tiles is like way too strong, and it probably is the case that either you shouldn't take or just take the pallet or the injury and then leave. So I want to give you a short way to do this, because basically a lot of people get really overwhelmed when they're thinking about like, oh, well, I got to learn all the tiles in the game. No, you don't have to learn all the tiles in the game to know which ones are too strong, too weak, all the tile combinations. You don't have to learn any of that. I can give you two shorthand ways to tell if a tile or loop is way too strong, and that is going to be connectivity and length. These two things are going to be connectivity and length. I'm going to be showing you those two things today. That way you can just at a glance tell if a tile is too strong or something that you should probably only take the hit or the pallet and then leave. That way you can have better matches in Dead by Daylight as killer. So what I have drawn for you here is a long wall, short wall tile. These are tiles that spawn very commonly almost every map in the game. It'll have one long side of the wall that you will see here on the right side. It'll have like a little short bit right here, and of course there's the brown pallet in the middle. Today I'll be signifying the survivor as a blue dot, and I'll be signifying the killer as a red dot. So that is what we're signifying in the chase here. So when we were referring to earlier, the two ways you can identify a strength of a tile or of a loop is based on the length of the loop and also the connectivity of a loop. And first we're going to be covering the length of a loop, and I think the long wall short wall is a perfect example on how to show this principle in general. So let's say we are at this pallet, right? The survivor has reached the pallet and the killer is here chasing after them, and they decide that they're going to drop said pallet. So they throw it. The pallet is now in the way. That pallet is looking like a Tootsie Roll, which is making me hungry. Anyways, so they throw the pallet is down, all right? So if you, as the killer, choose not to kick this and you choose to loop this, the survivor has two choices. They can either go around the long side of the loop, or they can go around the short side of the loop. Now, if you go around the short side of the loop, you decide to start looping this way, watch what happens. The killer starts to chase, they go, oh crap, he's coming. And by the time he reaches around here, they go to vault, and if they lunge, they will in fact get that hit on the survivor. They will in fact get that hit on them, because if you loop the short side of the loop, the killer, you got to remember, the killer is always faster than the survivor, besides a few small cases like Scratch Me or Myers and stuff like that. But the killer will always be 110 or 115 speed, sometimes faster because of powers and abilities, but the survivor is only a 100 speed. So if they decide to, for some reason, loop around here, the killer is going to be able to catch up to them. And if they decide to not vault the pallet here and they decide to keep running, once again, you are faster than the survivor, so you will eventually catch up. You'll eventually catch up and get the hit right here instead. But either way, you're getting the hit because they decided to loop the short side of the long wall short wall. That's why they call it a long wall short wall, because this is the long wall and this is the short wall. Ta-da! But if you vault if you decide to loop on the short side, you're going to get hit either way, which is why any sort of pallet loop, for example, like a rock loop, which is commonly referred to as path tiles. Let's go ahead and draw one of those real quick. So if you look down here, these are common on like Yamaoka, for example, or some junk tiles on Macmillan, but they're commonly referred to as path tiles because they're only used to get to other other loops, because they are incredibly weak on their own unless you're like playing a 110 killer. And essentially with these path tiles, they're weak because if you're looking at length, which is the thing we're using to identify here, it's short on both sides. It's short on both sides. So even if they drop the pallet here, no matter which way they loop, the killer is going to be able to easily circumvent either side and come around and get you. So you can see that like path tiles should really only be used as a tool to get to somewhere else, and not necessarily used as a loop themselves, because it's weak inherently because it has no length to it. There is no long side of a path tile. There is no long side of a path tile, so tiles like these are typically weak, so you should in fact probably play those. Now let's flip this on the other side for the long wall short wall. Let's say they drop that pallet and they start playing the long side of the wall. So they start running this way. You as the killer can start following them, right, and get about here, but if they notice, they're just going to run back, and by the time that you start closing the distance, they're vaulted. So they've already vaulted, and you go, ah, crap. So you either have a choice here to either kick the pallet or continue chasing around and hope you get bloodlust. So you continue chasing around, but by the time you get to this edge, they're already up here. They've already made it to the other side. So even then, you can come here, decide to kick the pallet now, but no, you can also decide to keep chasing, but then they're all the way over here. Do you see how the long side of the loop is incredibly strong because it gives them the space to get away from you and keep vaulting the resource? The long wall on any tile, long walls on any tile, no matter what kind, even if it's like something strange like a main building, long walls are very, very, very strong. Long walls are very, very good. So if you are going to try and play a long wall, you better best believe you have some sort of power or some sort of add-on that's going to help you circumvent those, or, you know, just take the L and kick the pallet. Because once this is gone, boop, it doesn't matter if they play the long wall, right? Because there's no resource. So even if they get to this point, they're not going to be able to vault. You will eventually catch up and hit them. But if you decide to play the long wall with the pallet down, of course, you're going to be in trouble because that wall, this longer wall here, gives them enough space to put between you and them, and that counts for, like, that's why, like, some of the stronger tiles of the game are like shack, long wall jungle gyms, normal jungle gyms. Like, that's why these are some of the more stronger tiles in the game, because they come with a long wall. Let's go ahead and look at one of those, actually. Okay, so right here I have drawn a long wall jungle gym, a long wall jungle gym. So this is the kind of the weird U-shaped thing, but it has the window, which I have identified with green here, with a little line through it to let you know you can actually pass through it. So this is one of those things we're talking about, length being something to identify a powerful loop. There's a long, it's literally called a long wall, a long wall jungle gym. There's a long wall right here, and it has a window at the center of it. So let's say the killer and the survivor approach this. The survivor is going to be very easily, even if they don't throw the pallet, able to just vault through this window right here. Even if you as the killer decide to go up, they have the ability to go this way and come around. So you have no option here besides to keep chasing them down this way, which you won't catch up because they can just get to this pallet. Or if you decide to mind game them and come back around, they now have the window available to them again. See, the problem, or not necessarily the problem, but the reason why, you know, jungle gyms are so strong is for this exact reason, is that essentially at both ends, whether that be the pallet or the window itself, because of the long wall, you have enough length to reach resources and keep looping resources for longer, because the wall, unless you're nurse, you can't go through the wall. You can't circumvent this. You can try to come through and you can vault, but of course, if you know, of course, it takes some time to vault this, so even if you take some time to vault this, they can make their way back over to the pallet because they still have to traverse this whole length of the wall again. So length is, if you're not getting it somehow at this point, if a pallet loop or a tile has long walls on it, so like even a 4-lane jungle gyms, long wall jungle gyms, shack, if it has a long wall to it, it helps survivors continue to loop a resource, like whether it be a window or a pallet, much, much longer, and that generally makes a tile very, very strong. On the flip side, if it's like a path tile, it's just 2 rocks or it's just 2 junk piles and that's it, and then it's just 1 pile in the middle. That pile is weak. That's probably a really, really good chase to take. Now let's go ahead and talk about the second principle of IDing a pallet or tile strength right away, that being loop connectivity. Loop connectivity. So connectivity is the second thing you want to be looking at if you're trying to, at a glance, determine if a loop is strong or weak. And I have put together what is a relatively strong loop connection, and I'm going to tell you exactly why that is. So what I've drawn here is one of the brand new, the very, very relatively new double long wall vaults. So remember the green or the window vaults. So there's a new tile where there's just 2 long walls and just a vault in the middle, and that's it. It's like they took the long wall from the long wall jungle gym and they just copied it twice, and that's the whole loop. And I've put it directly above a rock loop, or a junk tile, or a path tile as they're more commonly referred to, as right above a path tile. So remember, we previously identified, because of its short length, path tiles are not very strong. However, long walls are typically pretty good. So this kind of creates an interesting situation, but these combination, the connectivity, keyword here, the connectivity of these two kind of makes for a pretty strong combination, and I'm going to show you why. So let's say the survivor and the killer are right here. The killer has spotted the survivor's in the middle of the tile. He runs, vaults the window, and the killer starts following after. He decides, you know, vaulting takes a while. I'm going to go around. So the survivor can then connect the tiles and start running to the path tile. So now the killer decides he's going to chase after. The survivor decides to greed the pallet, which is the smart play. The killer, you know, probably waits a little bit, thinks they're going to drop the pallet. They don't drop the pallet. That gives him a little bit more space. So then they continue following through. Now watch, here's the connectivity. So typically in this situation, if this was just a rock pallet, the killer would be coming around, the survivor would just run to this pallet and they'd be forced to drop it and possibly get hit. However, because of the connectivity of the tiles, the survivor is going to actually be able to run off away from the path tile and make the vault. So now this path tile, which is usually typically considered weak because it's short on both sides, now is kind of weirdly buffed because it has kind of an extra exit. It has an extra exit out of the loop that doesn't typically exist on its own. If you think about it this way, you got to start kind of like, if loops are very, very close like this, you kind of start having to identify them as their own individual loops. So even though there's no such thing as like a path long wall, there kind of is one here if you really think about it. Like if you just cut this down into a box, like just this box right here, that's a loop on its own, right? That's a pallet and a long wall. That starts to kind of almost look like, you know, a long wall jungle gym a little bit. Just with that, just slightly weaker because the rocks on either side are really short. But this in itself is kind of its own little mini loop in here. And so that makes a, you know, like I said, a rock loop, which is typically pretty weak, kind of averagely strong because now it has, even though it's not on purpose, it's just kind of how the RNG fell. There is now a long wall window vault attached to this very, very weak tile, which does bring up its strength. So you got to identify this stuff as killer and see, like, hey, is there something right next to this tile that I typically can ID as weak that actually is going to make it much, much stronger because there's something else next to this? I'm sure you guys have all seen this wonderful combination on the Crotus Pren Asylum, both the asylum itself and also the Father Campbell's Chapel. Okay, this is one of the kind of like the more insanely strong tile setups that spawns pretty consistently. Like I said, specifically on the asylum maps, both of that entire realm kind of seems to do this a lot. You'll have the back here with the shack. There's the shack, you know, tile that spawns very commonly on most maps in the game. And then I have drawn a 4-lane or something similar right below it. So you can see that this is a very, very dangerous connectivity situation. It's probably something that should be patched soon at some point because this has been in the game for a while and it's a very busted setup, and I'm going to show you why. So let's say, you know, the survivor has run into Killer Shack, or they're working on a gen at the center of Shack right here, and the killer, you know, shows up on them. So the survivor runs, you know, the killer has to worry about them potentially dropping Shack pallet. You know, you probably shouldn't do that too early, but, you know, Shack pallet is a completely safe pallet. There's no way to circumvent it on either side. Remember, we were talking about the concept of length earlier. Look at how long these walls are. Is there any way to circumvent these at all? Nope. You are stuck in here as the killer. These walls are extremely long on both sides. There's nothing you can do. That's why Shack pallet's great. So you are going to be afraid of them dropping this, but look what's right here. There's a 4-lane right here with a window vault. So you run up here. You're going to be like, oh, are they going to drop Shack pallet? And they use that hesitation to just vault the window. So now you have one of the strongest tiles in the game that's made even stronger because essentially there's a free escape out of already one of the strongest tiles in the game, that being Shack. So you go to chase them, you know, you're okay, I'm going to vault this. And you vault that, and by the time you vault that, look where they are again. They're at Shack pallet, one of the strongest, you know, pallet drops in the game. So you chase them around and you're like, oh God, are they going to drop it? And you know what they do? They just go out and vault this window. And you go, oh crap, okay. So then you decide you're gonna, you know, chase them out, vault after them, and then they go through this vault. So they go out and they vault that window. And even if you try to like mind game it and come around this way and like push them here, you're giving them Shack pallet again. You're giving them Shack pallet again. In that case, you know, at this point, at least Bloodlust is probably kicked in, so they kind of have to drop Shack pallet, right? So at least you got that and you can start kicking that. But then once again, look, free escape through the window. It's ridiculous. Connectivity is one of the strongest things in this game, and it's why a lot of your matches are very, very terrible. But the thing is, what I'm trying to teach you here is you can see the length of a wall, go, that's really strong. See this connectivity and go, that's really strong. And no, you shouldn't commit to these chases because time in DBD is gen time. Time in DBD is gen time. And if you decide to take a chase like this at a heavily connected loop, at a very, very long loop, that's going to be a lot of time wasted. So either just take the pallet or take an injury and leave it behind. Hopefully by using these two principles of noticing the length of a loop and noticing the connectivity of loop, you are able to see, is this chase actually worth taking? Because one of the most huge mistakes that I see that killers make is they want to take every chase. They want to take as many chases as possible, and that is the fun part of the game. I totally understand that's what I find the most fun in the game. But in circumstances like this, it's just very time inefficient. Very, very time inefficient to take a chase at a very, very long loop or at a very, very heavily connected loop. So hopefully you can use those two things to identify which chases you should probably not take. That way you can have more efficient results in Dead by Daylight as killers. So thank you so much for watching, guys. Hopefully that helps you kind of like at a glance identify the strength of tiles and loops without having to learn each individual one over and over and over, like watch those like really long videos about this tile is this tile's a that, and it's this and this, that. Nope. You just use these two principles. Look at the length, look at the connectivity, and you're able to easily identify, should I take this chase or should I not? So yeah, hopefully that helps, friend. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully you learned something today. But I do upload daily, so I will see you in tomorrow's video, friends. But if I do not, I will see you when I see you. Goodbye.